This episode is brought to you by my free 3-part video series, FAM 101. Discover how to chart your cycles by tracking the 3 main fertile signs: cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and cervical position, and ultimately develop body literacy by paying attention to your fertile signs. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 to grab your free copy. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 211. Welcome to the 211th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Amy Medling, the PCOS diva. And I remember I interviewed Amy years ago. She was one of my very first interviews. If you kind of go back to the scroll, like all the way down or go back to the archives, Amy was one of the very first interviews that I did. I think she was in the 20s. So she was one of those one of the first 30 interviews that I did. And even back then, years and years ago, she was really actively supporting women to understand and gain awareness about PCOS and also to overcome it. A lot of women who are diagnosed with PCOS are still told that, they probably won't get pregnant and they'll need fertility drugs and all that kind of stuff. And, that is true for some women, but it's not true for all women with PCOS. PCOS is so common. It's the most common cause of anovulatory infertility. And so it is one of the most common fertility challenges that women face. And so what I love about Amy's work is she really brings hope and education and empowerment to this whole conversation. And instead of women feeling like they're in the dark with this diagnosis that they don't understand, she really works to demystify a lot of it and empower you to make choices for yourself, to improve your menstrual cycles, and obviously also improve your fertility and your ability to conceive naturally. So registration is officially closed for the 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. And at the time that I'm releasing this episode, we have already had our first session together, which is exciting. So our brand new group, we just started this week, Tuesday. And so as this episode is airing, we have just had our first session together. So I love the very beginning of the group program. I think it's a lot of fun. Everyone's new, everyone's getting to know each other. And it's always just a reminder to me how important it is to really take time to go through and cover the basics and never to assume, every woman's coming from different experiences charting. And so it's really nice just to be able to bring everybody together and kind of start from scratch, like put up the drawing board and really go through so we can be really, really comfortable and confident with charting by the end. So if you missed out on this opportunity, that's completely fine. There's still ways that we can work together. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. I have an ongoing one-on-one coaching program that's kind of goes all the time. So the 10-week program is different because I only offer that at certain times during the year, but the one-on-one coaching program is always available. And so if you're looking for that like one-on-one support where the group aspect of it is nice, but you really just want to focus in on your cycles and just kind of get to the point and have more one-on-one time so we can make it really personalized, that is available. So more information on that over at fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. Now let's jump into today's episode. And today I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Amy Medling, to the show. Amy Medling, author of Healing PCOS and certified health coach, specializes in working with women with polycystic ovary syndrome who are frustrated and have lost all hope when the only solution their doctors offer is to lose weight, take a pill, and live with their symptoms. And in response, Amy founded PCOS Diva and developed a proven protocol of supplements, diet, and lifestyle programs that offer women tools to help gain control of their PCOS and regain their fertility, femininity, health, and happiness. For those of you who've been listening to the show for quite some time, Amy was one of my very first guests, appearing on episode number 22 of the podcast. So if you haven't listened to that episode, you'll definitely want to go back and take a listen because that episode was actually jam-packed with a ton of helpful information about PCOS. And in today's show, we'll be talking about Amy's new book, Healing PCOS. And so without further ado, welcome back to the show, Amy.
Oh, thank you. I'm so thrilled to be back.
Well, thank you for coming back. I'll tell the listeners the story. I think it's really kind of serendipitous, but I didn't even know you had written a book, and I was just kind of browsing, perusing on Amazon for something, and then I saw it. I was like, oh, wow, Amy wrote a book. So really excited to have you on the show to talk about it. I think the listeners can go back to our first episode if they want, like the whole history of how everything kind of began. But I'd love to hear about what inspired you to write this book and why now.
Yeah, so, I've had a lot of success working with women one-on-one in my private coaching practice and in my online group coaching program. And I've actually had over 5,000 women go through that program. And when you've had those numbers of women with PCOS and you've seen their successes and you've seen kind of what works for them and what doesn't, as well, I'm a woman with PCOS myself. So I started really seeing trends and underlying sort of factors in terms of how women think about their PCOS. And I just felt like I needed to get sort of these ahas and things that lead to true healing out in a bigger way. So that's really what precipitated me writing the book. And, writing a book is it's such a labor of love, because once, you write the book, and that seems like, okay, I'm done. But then the whole editing process it takes just as long as writing the book. So it is a true labor of love. And I'm so happy it's out in the world.
Yes. Yes. I know you mentioned you're like, I'm tired now. Well, that's not exactly how you set out. That's like a paraphrase, but thank you so much for sending me the book. So I'm actually holding it in my hands. I think you did a really great job. And what I really like about it as well is that it's very practical. It's very practical. It gives a lot of information about PCOS. So it definitely gives a woman a place to go. But I like how you structured it. So it's a 21-day plan for reclaiming your health and your life with polycystic ovarian syndrome. So you're actually like giving women like things, very specific things to do, which I think the readers will really appreciate that. So as I was thinking about what questions to ask you for the interview, what came to mind was, for the listener who was literally just diagnosed with PCOS, or for the listener who thinks that she might have PCOS based on her symptoms and what she's read about it, what are some of the basic things that you want her to know? Kind of like, where do you start when you're in that stage?
Yeah, so the first thing that I would want a woman to know is that there is so much hope, no matter what your doctor says. And I can tell you that I've been told that they would have to jump through hoops one day to get me pregnant, that I would never get pregnant unless I had fertility treatments, that, the only prescription for me was the birth control pill to manage my elevated androgens, and metformin, which is a diabetic drug used off label to help women with insulin resistance, which made me so sick. And, I felt like that was all that was available for me. And I think that a lot of women with PCOS, when they're just diagnosed, they're often receiving the same messages, although I do think that healthcare providers are becoming a little bit more educated in PCOS, or you're told to, go on a low carb diet. And now, the hot new diet is the keto diet. Go on a keto diet and get to the gym. And that's really all the information that you're given. And there's no cure. So, I just want a woman to sort of step away from that fear-based thinking, which is so incredibly hard to do, and to move into a place of hope and a mindset of abundant health.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's beautifully said. And you took us through kind of like this great divide between standard medical treatment and some of the holistic kind of dietary and lifestyle alterations that you can make that make a big difference. So maybe share with us. So you mentioned your coaching program, and you mentioned how you've supported thousands of women to overcome PCOS in different ways. So maybe share with us kind of that divide, the divide between what your doctor is telling you is possible and what you have seen as possible through a different way of approaching it.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, doctors are quick to give sort of this Band-Aid fix of the birth control pill and metformin. And yes, for many women, it can kind of mask symptoms, but it doesn't really get to the root of your PCOS. And in my book, I talk about sort of three factors: inflammation, hormone imbalance, and insulin resistance. So you really want to get to the root of those three things and heal that and bring your body back into balance so you can have true healing. And I did mention there is no cure for PCOS, but I do think that we can be on this lifelong continuum of healing, and it's something that we have to manage over the course of a lifetime. So I think the fact that there is no Band-Aid fix is really the number one thing to realize. And I write in the book that a lot of women are looking for the magic pill, and a big mindset shift for women with PCOS is to kind of realize that you are the magic pill. That is, you are the one that has to do the hard work to feel better. But it's so worth it. So I start the book with a chapter called Thinking Like a Diva, because I really believe that you have to shift your mindset, and you have to shift out of that place of thinking and acting like a victim and sort of leaving your care in the hands of everyone else but you. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. I really liked how you explained that in the book, because that was kind of I don't remember if we talked about it in our first interview. Maybe that's bad, but it was like 3 years ago. But when you described what it means to be a diva, I really like the story that you told when you and your husband were out for dinner, and then you were kind of ordering a meal the way that you needed to order it. Maybe you could share that story and just really share with us, like, what does it mean to be a PCOS diva, and why is it necessary?
Sure. Yeah, I'll share that story quick, and then I can sort of read the definition of what is a PCOS diva from the book if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay, so basically, I wasn't able to tolerate those pharmaceuticals, and I was 30 at the time, and I was 31, and I had a little baby and a 3-year-old, and I could not get off of the couch in the afternoon. I was just so exhausted, and I felt like I was way too young to feel so old, and sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. And there had to be another way to manage this PCOS. And so I started experimenting with my diet, and I actually, it was actually a naturopath doctor friend of mine suggested that I get a glucometer to see what food was doing to my blood sugar. And that was such a great tool for me. And I really experimented with it and started to figure out what food worked best for me, because I believe that food is medicine, and it really has the power to heal us. So as I was playing with my diet and experimenting and figuring out what worked for me, I started to advocate for myself. And, especially like in a very polite way. I mean, I talk about like this kind of diva is not like Mariah Carey being like carted off in a chaise lounge, only eating green M&Ms. Like that's not the kind of diva that I'm talking about. It's really a woman that asks for what she needs. And you can still do that very nicely. But I was at a restaurant with my husband, and I was ordering my steak, and then they asked me if I wanted a potato, and I said, well, can I get a sweet potato? And they said, sure. Do you want that loaded? And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, what the heck is a loaded sweet potato? And that was like, it had like marshmallow and cinnamon sugar. And I said, can I just get straight cinnamon? And they didn't have straight cinnamon, which boggled my mind. But after a little bit of back and forth, making sure that I was getting exactly what I wanted, the waitress left the table, and my husband kind of sighed, exasperated, like, gosh, when have you become such a diva? And, I was definitely the type of person that put everybody else's needs in front of mine, and, had a hard time saying no and advocating for myself. But when he said that, I was a little taken aback. But then the more I thought about it, I realized that I had to be a diva, and I had to put my self-care first in order to be the best mom and wife that I could be. So I'd love to read the description of a PCOS diva from my book.
Mm-hmm.
A PCOS diva is a woman with hope. She has taken charge of her health and happiness and takes steps every day to enhance both. She chooses to thrive with PCOS and is empowered by the knowledge she gathers as she educates herself about PCOS. As a result of her regimen, she is able to give her best to herself and others and be an example of the power of self-care. She is capable of advocating for herself and surrounds herself with a supportive healthcare team and community of friends and family she deserves. A PCOS diva looks beyond the physical support required to manage symptoms and works to heal and enhance her whole person, mind, body, and spirit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that. It's so important as women. I think so you and I both work with women in different capacities. I teach women to chart their cycles and that's basically kind of like a starting point in their relationship with their bodies. And so even the example that you gave of getting a glucometer and then starting to pay attention to how certain foods interacted with you, how much higher certain foods raised your blood sugar than others. And that gives you an opportunity to also pay attention to how you feel when that happens. And I feel like the broader conversation here is a term I always refer to as, body literacy, and just not only getting in your body and seeing how different things affect you, but then taking the next step and really having to advocate for yourself. Maybe share some of the challenges that you've seen working with women. It's not easy to advocate for yourself, especially when you're going against the kind of common standard model. And so I'd be curious to hear what some of your experiences have been like, or some of the women that you've worked with trying to get what they need from their doctors who may or may not be supportive of them.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to this mindset where a woman feels like she isn't deserving and isn't worth it. And for women with PCOS, that is a major theme. And I do think it's kind of comes from this place of PCOS sort of robbing our femininity, where we're fertility challenged. PCOS is the leading cause of female infertility. We're losing hair where, we want hair, and gaining it where we don't. And we're struggling with acne and weight gain. So I do think that there's this sense of that we're not enough and we're not deserving. So I think that when a woman can make that shift, that she is worth it and she is enough and she deserves to advocate for herself, then she becomes very empowered. But I will say that there isn't a study, like a medical study done on, or numerous medical studies done on certain supplements or diets, it's really hard to talk to your doctor because they speak the language of studies. And I've just found in my experience is to just sort of experiment on yourself. And if you start feeling better and you go to the doctor and your lab results improve, then the proof's in the pudding and it's hard to refute. And, you become part of the change. What's the Gandhi quote, be the change you wish to see. You become that change and you start enlightening doctors. And it's really an exciting thing. I actually had a couple women come up to me. I was in Washington, D.C. for PCOS Advocacy Day a couple weeks ago. And they came up to have asked me if I'd sign their books, which of course I was thrilled. And I asked them where they had heard about the book. And their doctor and a nutritionist had recommended the book. So, I think we're slowly making gains, but I think you just have to realize you're worth fighting for.
Mm-hmm. Well, that, and then also that you can be healthy.
Yes. I think that's huge. And I think especially in fertility, if somebody has told you that you can't get pregnant, miracles happen every day. And I'm sure you see them with your clients, Lisa. Mm-hmm. And I know that if I had taken what the doctor said when I was 18 about jumping through hoops one day to get me pregnant and thinking that that was my truth, that, I may never have kids, then who knows where I'd be today. But I held out for hope, and, now I have 3 beautiful children.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't help but think about the parallels to the menstrual cycle. So we haven't really gone deep into PCOS and kind of what it is. And maybe we should do that. Maybe you should kind of give us a bit of an overview just so that we have a basic understanding of what it is, what it looks like, and we've kind of talked about a little bit, but what some of those common symptoms are. Because in my work, we're staring at the menstrual cycle all the time. So the central piece of every client consult that I do or in a group program is the woman's chart that's up for us to see, and where ovulation is happening in the cycle, what our cervical mucus looks like, how long the luteal phase is. And in PCOS, in the same way that you've been talking about how to kind of, when you mentioned, experimenting on yourself, checking to see how if the labs improve, then you have your answer. With the menstrual cycle, it's also quite obvious. With PCOS, women stop ovulating, so it's like, or they, the ovulation is often delayed quite a bit. And so when you start to see that improve, that the proof, as you said, the proof is in the pudding there too. So it's interesting because the cycle, in the same way that the lab work would reinforce what you're doing, the cycle does the same. Anyways,
absolutely.
So the question is more so, maybe take us through some of the basics about PCOS so that we all have a sense of what it is, and then that would lend itself to us knowing how we would track those improvements.
Sure. So interestingly, that's how I was diagnosed. It took me 15 years to get a diagnosis of PCOS, and I was using the Crichton model of natural family planning, and my instructor was the one, looking at my cervical mucus charting, suggested that, I may have PCOS. So I think that tracking your cycle is just such a important part of really understanding, your body and your PCOS, and exactly what you said, how it changes and improves over time. But PCOS is one of the most common endocrine system disorders found in women. It's the leading cause of female infertility. And when I first started working in the PCOS space as a health coach, the statistic was 1 in 10 women have PCOS. But now they're suggesting that the numbers may be as much as 1 in 5 women have PCOS symptoms. And I'll just kind of go through some of the common symptoms. So irregular ovulation or absent ovulation, polycystic ovaries. So it's like 12 or more cysts. They sort of look like this string of pearls around your ovary, and you would be diagnosed on an ultrasound. High levels of insulin resistance and insulin, easy weight gain or obesity, acne. 50% of women have type 2 diabetes by the time they're 40 with PCOS. So blood sugar issues are a huge problem, and is again one of that root cause of PCOS. Women with PCOS deal with depression, anxiety, poor body image, eating disorders. They're often thyroid disorders go hand in hand. Hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's are the most common. High levels of androgen, and that drives symptoms like hair loss and hair growth. Sleep apnea, and darkening of the skin areas, and skin tags, which also kind of go along with insulin resistance. So if you're listening to this and you're kind of checking off a lot of these symptoms, it's real, and you have not been diagnosed with PCOS, it's really important that you talk to your practitioner, because 50% of women that have PCOS are undiagnosed. And your practitioner may think that it's just a reproductive age syndrome, but it really goes beyond that into like your perimenopause, postmenopause years, and it makes us more susceptible to cardiovascular issues, the type 2 diabetes, as I mentioned, and things like endometrial cancer, because a lot of women with PCOS aren't shedding their lining every month. So it's important to be diagnosed.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's incredible. I was doing a bit of research on PCOS lately, and so I'll just tell you kind of what came of it and how I kind of look at it a little bit differently now. I think because we have ovaries and a menstrual cycle, that is the disruption that happens as a result, really, of what you've called the root cause. So there's obviously something else going on, and the way that it seems to present in our bodies is this disrupted menstrual cycle and then all of those symptoms. But the actual, you know what I mean? Like, because we have ovaries and because we have a menstrual cycle and because PCOS disrupts the menstrual cycle, it is looked at as a disease of fertility when it really should be looked at as a disease of cardiovascular health and metabolic consequences.
And there is kind of this effort underway by some research scientists to change the name of PCOS to something like metabolic reproductive syndrome. I'm not sure if that's the most helpful thing at this point. I'd much rather put like our efforts into increasing funding for PCOS research than trying to change the name. But you're right that it's bigger than just reproduction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that it would make any sense to waste time and resources changing the name, more so deepening the understanding. And I suppose this came out in the interview that I did with Dr. Catherine Sharif. But when, for instance, like when a young woman has these symptoms and she's not trying to have babies, then obviously the solution, that the standard kind of common solution, is the birth control pill, right? And when that basically just puts a pause on the disrupted ovulation, so you don't really see the cycle disruption, so you kind of can set it and forget it. But the woman has like this underlying metabolic condition that is not being addressed. So for me, it's less about the name, but more about like we have to start addressing this, because this is a serious health issue for women. 50%, you mentioned, of women with PCOS then go on to develop type 2 diabetes. That's incredibly significant.
Yeah, I mean, we're at the point where it's really a health crisis when you're talking about 20% of the female population dealing with PCOS. So you're absolutely right.
Well, so let's talk about how to address it. I'd love for you to take us through the 21-day plan that you present in the book. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I think it's really important to have these practical steps that women can do. But why did you design it that way? I'd love for you to kind of take us through that. And what are some of the benefits of actually going through the full 21 days as outlined in the book?
Yeah. So, again, I took so much of this like idea of the 21-day plan from my coaching program and my online coaching program. I'm sorry, my one-on-one coaching. And I think that 21 days, of course, my publisher thought that sounded like just the right amount of time. And then I do think it's a nice amount of time to make a lifestyle jumpstart. And I actually, as we're speaking, we're on day 17. I'm doing a live sort of where I'm calling it the Healing PCOS Book Club. So if you're listening, we're probably done with the actual live program, but you can go into the book club and read the book, and you can, get support from other women that are, reading the book and going through the plan. But, at day 17, women are really having some breakthroughs, and a lot of it has to do with the mindset piece. But of course, the 21-day program includes a meal plan. The book has 85 recipes. So everything in the meal plan, I give you a recipe for those weeks. And I also include a protocol, a daily protocol. And I think a big part of healing PCOS is finding more time for you to do these sort of self-care rituals. And so I ask you each week to wake up 15 minutes earlier. So by the time you finish, the week 1 is Discover Week, week 2 is Live Week, and week 3 is Thrive Week. So by the time you get to Thrive Week, you're waking up about 45 minutes earlier. Now, of course, this is like perfect world scenario. And I talk about in the book, there's really, we're just looking for progress, not perfection. So if your lifestyle isn't conducive, if you're already getting up at 4 a.m. to go to work, I mean, I don't want you getting up at, 3 a.m., but you need to find by the end of the 21 days, an extra 45 minutes in your day to take care of you. And then I give you a whole morning ritual and nighttime, evening ritual, because I think women with PCOS really tend to have disruptive circadian rhythms and cortisol cycles. They tend to be sort of tired but wired in the evening, and their cortisol is high when it should be low. It's sort of this inverse curve. So, we're doing some things to work on normalizing your sleeping patterns. I really try to help women work to manage their stress level, because stress really wreaks havoc on PCOS. So I've integrated, I call it meditation moments, and we do that in week 3. In week 2, we introduce more movement, and that's kind of what I term exercise. I think there's less of the feeling of would've, should've, could've, like out exercise, when you just sort of take really focus on what type of movement brings you joy. And one of the women in the book club said today, I hate to exercise, but I love swimming. And she really connects swimming with something she loved to do in her childhood. And that's exactly what we're looking for, is some type of movement that can be really sustainable for you. So we incorporate the food piece, the mindset piece, the stress reduction, sleep, self-care, and it's all contained in that 21-day program. And when you finish, you're really, prepared to then kind of continue this journey and keep stepping forward. And, I love that quote by Lao Tzu, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but you just got to keep stepping. And I like to say that you get, in addition to progress, not perfection, but you're always one choice away from getting back on track. And I really just hope that my book gives you a sort of a toolbox, and it's a way for you to learn how to manage your PCOS so you can feel better.
Well, I really liked how you did take, because you took a fair amount of time in the book to talk about establishing those daily rituals and why it's important, and just kind of going through and having it. And I thought that was really interesting. Not only, and it's kind of like throughout the day, like kind of organizing yourself in the mornings and having a ritual, having certain things that you do, certain things that you say to yourself, and starting your day off in a positive way. And then also towards the end, and it's both from it's all very practical, but it's both from kind of that practical, like, this is what I do, to also addressing the mindset aspect of it. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, I think it's because healing is so much more than going on a low carb diet and going to the gym. You really have to address, mind, body, spirit. And I think that I've tried to do that in the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about the movement piece. I think you did address it, but you mentioned, I wrote it down. In one of the sections, you mentioned kind of like 3 different types of exercises, like high intensity interval training, strength training, and then the mind body movement. And so, I think it's more than what we could cover in the podcast, but I thought it was really interesting that you're encouraging women to move in different ways and to think about it in a different way. You may have seen this a lot in some of the women that you're working with, but there's often this tendency to just to kind of go hard, right? Like to kind of do this 7-day, run every day type of situation that ends up kind of burning out your adrenals and causing more problems than it solves. So maybe just share with us why you took this approach to exercise movement.
Yeah, and the book is very story driven. I start each chapter with a story from my life, and so much of it is what I've learned along my journey. And I remember, I tend to be one of those sort of type A people, and I really just, whatever I do, I go all in. And I always felt like unless I was sweating and heart pounding and, felt like literally had run miles, that workout wasn't enough. And in a lot of ways, I think it was somewhat of a form of self-punishment. I was kind of trying to exercise out all the calories, that whole paradigm of calorie in, calorie out, which I hate now. But I got to a point in my 20s where early 20s, where I had ran so long and so hard, like every day without a break, that I had shin splints and I couldn't run anymore and I had to walk. And the crazy thing in my mind was like, okay, I've been running all this time, I haven't lost any weight. But now I stopped the intensity and I'm walking and now I'm dropping pounds. And I think that's really typical for women with PCOS. Our adrenals are a lot of Dr. Fiona McCullough. She has a great book called 8 Steps to Reverse Your PCOS. And she talks about adrenal androgen PCOS. It's like kind of a type of PCOS that she's noticed in her patients. And it's a real like I think women, and I tend to think I have that type of PCOS, we have to be really careful with our adrenals, and hard exercise like, really hard CrossFit or training for a half marathon or something like that. It tends to be counterproductive, and we don't understand why we're gaining weight when all of our friends are losing weight doing the same type of exercise. So when you shift to things that are a little bit like less intense, often you can see these health shifts, like even in your cycle and in your charting. But it's just, PCOS is a syndrome and it doesn't affect everyone in the same way. So like experimenting with your diet, it's important to experiment with exercise as well to see what works for you. But to sort of experiment in those 3 areas that you mentioned before, the high intensity interval training, I mean, it's more of the getting your heart rate up and down in short, intense kind of bursts. And then strength training and like mind body movement like yoga, there's been studies that show how beneficial yoga is for women with PCOS.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like one of the points I just want to highlight about the way that you're talking about exercise and movement is very much that every woman isn't the same. And I thought of something I wanted to ask you, with all the women you've worked with over the years, how do you address that question of like, why is this happening to me? When we're talking about the different ways that, so in your example, you said, well, and we all know this, some women seem to be able to exercise like a ton and it doesn't necessarily affect their cycle very much, although it might, and we don't know about it. Whereas others are more sensitive, like we all have our areas of sensitivity. And so we very much have to figure out what works for us. Even if something is quote unquote healthy, it may not work for us. So how do you kind of address that? When like, why is it me? Why do I have to have PCOS? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that when you have a chronic illness that, there is no cure, I think you definitely go through those 5 stages of grief and, the bargaining or the denial. And finally, I hope I can help women to work through to a place of acceptance. And I find that if you can focus on gratitude, yes, you might have PCOS, but focus on all the good things that you have. I know today is day 17, I had mentioned in the live program. And we were talking about dressing, like really dressing so that you feel beautiful. And it's so easy to compare yourself to other people and say, oh my gosh, my friend Susan is so tall and elegant, and I'm short and frumpy or whatever. But you have to like focus on the good stuff and the benefits and the gratitude and, the features that you want to play up. So, you might not be able to run a marathon like your friend because it's just too much, but you might be really strong and you really love like a strength training class, or you can really do well in a bar class, but your friend Susan can't. I think you have to get away from comparison to others. And I know that's not always easy to do, but I know that if you remember that quote, is it Theodore Roosevelt? Comparison is the thief of joy. Mm-hmm. And that's, you have to just realize that is just the truth.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the more that I do this work with women, the more you see that we are all different. And yes, there are general tenets of health, right? Like, of course there are. But for each woman, one woman's Like what really supports and helps one woman is another woman's poison. And we each have to kind of be on this journey of really seeing what works for us and paying really close attention to how certain things affect our body. And so exercise is such a great example of how you can utilize your menstrual cycle as a diagnostic tool or as a vital sign. I'll give you an example. I was working with a client and she added in some exercise. So she started exercising a lot more than she had been just to kind of try it out. And she ended up like spotting pre-ovulatory where that never happened before. And then when she kind of cut back a little bit, the spotting went away. So it's not always that dramatic, and that's just one example. But I mean, we can all kind of pay attention to how we feel and our energy levels and all of those types of things in addition to something like your menstrual cycle to really get the sense of like, no, I have to really pay attention to what's going to work for me, not just what so-and-so says is what works for everybody. And I think this is, so in one of the sections of your book where you kind of were talking a little bit about the supplement program and some of the supplements that support women with PCOS, what you said was there is no PCOS supplement, quote unquote. Every woman is unique. And so I would love to hear a little bit about that. So I think with PCOS, there's a lot of things going on there. And so there are a lot of different supplements that have been shown to improve various symptoms that women with PCOS are experiencing. But often there's that, it's what you said at the beginning of the show, which is like, we all want that magic pill, like that thing that we just take that's going to fix everything. And although there are certain benefits of certain things, every woman reacts differently and responds differently. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of charlatans out there, I think, sort of selling like the PCOS cure, and they throw like the kitchen sink into, a supplement package. And I just think that's, often a real waste of money because not everybody has the same symptoms. And, I think for a lot of women too, just making dietary and changes like exercise can often be enough where you don't need a whole laundry list of supplements. But, research shows that a lot of us are nutrient deficient. Women with PCOS tend to be deficient in vitamin D and omega-3s and minerals like zinc and chromium. So I do believe that most women with PCOS do well. I call it my sort of essentials, like a good multivitamin with methylated Bs and a good omega-3 oil and a vitamin D supplement. And then from there, and then see how you feel. And then from there, I really suggest adding in one supplement at a time and waiting, 6 weeks and see how that makes a difference. Because if you take everything at once, then you don't really know what's working and what's not. So, there's other really supplements that can really help with fertility if that's what you're looking for. N-acetylcysteine can really help with egg quality. I know there's been some research done, especially with like IVF cycles. I mean, it's just a good supplement for your liver too. And a lot of women with PCOS tend to have non-alcoholic fatty liver disorder. And then there's things like inositols that help on so many different levels. And berberine can help with blood sugar and testosterone. I mean, there's just, there's so many. And I kind of have like a nice little cheat sheet blueprint on my website that kind of goes through the different symptoms that you have and then the different supplements you might want to try. But again, don't throw everything at it. You want to do it sort of incrementally and just kind of testing and see how it makes you feel.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think it's really important to have that kind of a balanced approach to anything, because I'm sure you found this as well. Like if you change nothing and take a bunch of supplements, you're not going to get the results you want, right? Like if you kind of ignore all of the dietary stuff, like you never get enough sleep and if you just ignore all of basically the reasons why this is worsening, the things that are worsening the situation. Yeah, I feel like it doesn't exist in a vacuum. So I appreciate the way that you present them as part of what you do to resolve this issue.
Yeah, it's like a piece. It works synergistically with everything else. And I remember seeing a quote in a magazine like, "You can't exercise away a McDonald's like Big Mac shake and a fry. Like you can't do that." And it's the same with supplement. You can't supplement away, a bad diet and a bad lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well said. Well, so as we kind of approach the end of our interview, I'd love to hear from you. I mean, we've talked about quite a bit. I feel like the listeners have learned a lot about PCOS and also have some tools, some very practical ways to start addressing it. And I think most importantly, some hope, knowing that, there are many women there are many women who've had the same diagnosis and have gone on to resolve or at least manage the condition such that their fertility returns and their cycles normalize and all that. So I think it gives a lot of hope to women, especially if their doctors haven't given them a whole lot. But what do you think is the most important thing that you'd like the listeners to take away from our conversation today?
So, I really want, it's not your fault that you have PCOS or you're struggling with fertility. That's not your fault, but thinking and acting like a victim is. And, being able to shift your mindset and what you had said earlier, Lisa, about opening yourself up to the possibility of being healthy and being fertile and knowing that you are enough and you deserve to have, a healthy, happy life. I think that's just such a huge shift and holding on to the hope and staying in sort of this abundant hope-based thinking rather than fear or lack-based thinking around your health is so important. And finally, really, and I named this little section in my last chapter called Moving Forward with Gratitude. And there's, one wonderful way to like elevate your energy and your thinking about your health is to focus on gratitude and all of the good things that's going on in your life. So, gratitude, hope, abundance, rest on that rather than fear and victimhood and lack thinking.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful words to end on. So where can our listeners go to learn more about what you do and also to pick up a copy of your new book, Healing PCOS?
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me at PCOSdiva.com, and I'm on, all the social media platforms, usually hashtag PCOSdiva. And my book is available at, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookstores, really anywhere books are sold.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here, Amy. It was a lot of fun to have you back on the show again.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/211. I hope that you enjoyed my interview with Amy. Amy is I'm very inspired by Amy. And even after we hung up, I was telling her how much she inspires me, how much I really appreciate the work that she's doing. It's so important for women, all women, but in this case in particular, women with PCOS, to have an advocate out there who's, actively working to provide helpful, accurate information so that you have a place to go if you have a diagnosis, so that you don't feel like you're alone, so that you know that there's, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of women who are going through a similar diagnosis, a similar situation. And so that you know that it's possible, like there is hope, because there's a lot of research that has been done about PCOS. There are a lot of women who have PCOS and who've been able to normalize their cycles, recover their natural fertility, and conceive. And so I think it's really important for us to have kind of that flip side, whereas many women are still told by their physicians that there's nothing they can do and they probably won't be able to conceive and that they'll need to have fertility drugs to make them ovulate. There are women who, through getting the support that they need and addressing the different issues that are specific to PCOS, are able to actually regain their fertility and normalize their cycles. And so what I really appreciate about Amy's book, so if you have PCOS yourself, or if you know someone with PCOS, make sure to check out Healing PCOS by Amy Medling. And what I really like about the book is that it gives a 21-day plan. So it's like actionable information. So there's lots of information itself, but what I like about it is that it's actionable. Like, it gives you something to do. It gives you a plan to follow. You can really go in there and like highlight and like dog ear the pages and just kind of like do, if you were to actually go through and like do everything in the way that she lays it out, you couldn't help but see results. And so, when I work with women who have PCOS, I think one of the things that surprises them the most is how responsive your cycle can be to these dietary and lifestyle changes. I think that we really underestimate the impact of food, the impact of good sleep, the impact of stress management. We really underestimate how much those things can affect our cycle. And when you start to chart your cycles using the fertility awareness method, that really gives you the opportunity to see just how much these different things can impact your cycle. So especially it's frustrating when you have PCOS and you're charting. Often you'll have these long cycles and it just seems like ovulation is never happening. And especially because we're all told that ovulation is supposed to happen on day 15 of the cycle, it can feel really just disconcerting when it's like day 25 and day 29 and there's still no ovulation. And so I think but with that said, I still think it's really important and helpful to chart in whatever capacity makes sense for you, just so that you can really have a way to gauge how effective any interventions that you're doing are actually like the effect that they're having on your cycle. And I think in women with PCOS, that's one of the most helpful aspects of charting, is using it to really gauge how much those changes that you're making are working. Because when you hit the nail on the head, you will see changes in your cycle. You will see shortening of the follicular phase, like ovulation happening earlier in the cycle. And so you will actually be able to track your cycle and see the progress that you're making. And so for those of you who are relatively new to the fertility awareness method, or even if you've been charting your cycles for a while, I made a great resource for you. It's a free resource. Earlier this year, I created a free 3-part video series, and I basically go through the fertility awareness basics. I break down the 3 main fertile signs and talk about the aspect of fertility awareness charting as a way to really monitor your health and as a vital sign. And so for more information to get your free copy of my 3-part video series, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101. So fertilityfriday.com/FAM101 if you haven't got it already. And so I just want to thank you for taking some time to spend with me today. There's so many podcasts out there, but you're listening to mine, and I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you for being part of the community. When I first started this podcast, I really started from scratch. And over the years, an amazing community has kind of grown up around me. And so when I'm podcasting, I really feel like when I first started podcasting, I felt like I was like alone, because I literally was like in my basement podcasting. But now when I'm podcasting, I really feel the energy of all the women around me. I've worked with hundreds of women in my community. There's thousands of women in my Facebook community. So if you're not part of the Facebook community, head over to fertilityfriday.com/community and you can join us in there. But, now I know there's women around me, and there's women who really appreciate and love and, listen to the podcast and share that vision that I have of every single woman on earth having knowledge of her body and her fertility. And it's so funny. I posted this in the Facebook group a little while ago. And then I think I might have mentioned on the show once, but so I've been working a lot. I have some projects going on. I'm putting the final touches on my first book. And so that's been taking a ton of my energy over the past year and a half plus more. And so my son was asking me the other day, he was like, "Mommy, when are you going to be done your work?" And so, I looked at him and I was like, "Well, sweetheart, when every woman on earth understands the connection between her menstrual cycle and her overall health." And of course he's 5. So he's like, "Okay, mommy," whatever. But that's how I feel. I feel like it's really important. I'm very, very, as you know, I'm passionate about sharing this information with women. And I always say, like, I'm not saying that every woman needs to use fertility awareness as their method of birth control, because it's not for every woman. And there's so many different ways to even use, there's so many different techniques of fertility awareness charting and I did an episode of apps recently. And so there's all these different ways that women can use this knowledge. And so it's not about saying that there's only one way to use the knowledge, or that every woman even needs to chart, or that every woman needs to use this method for birth control. Because I actually don't think that, because I don't think this method is right for everybody. I know it's not. It's not right for everybody. But with that said, I do believe that every woman has the right to know how her body and her fertility works. And I believe that every woman has the right to know that she's not fertile every single day, and that her menstrual cycle does matter for her health, regardless of whether or not she ever plans to have children. Those things I'm very clear on. And so that is what this is about. This is about raising awareness and really supporting women to connect with that knowledge, and just to kind of play with it and see how it can affect their own lives. And so for many women, it does mean, okay, I'm going to start charting, and I'm going to pay attention to my cycles, and I'm going to use this method for birth control. And like for me, 17 years later, I'm still talking about it, and I'm still tracking my cycles, and I'm still actively using fertility awareness as my primary method of birth control. But either way, we all just have the right to know. And that's what it boils down to. So I really appreciate you for your part in that, for the part that you're playing in that, whether it is by supporting the show and just listening to the podcast, or whether it is from sharing the podcast with your friends and from talking about it, whether it's from finding ways to spread awareness about fertility awareness in your own community, whatever it is that you're doing, I think it's amazing. And really and truly, I do believe we're starting a movement. So thank you for being a part of that. And with that, I will say goodbye. So thank you so much for listening. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.